All right, so let's dive into something a little different this time, something a little unsettling. The others, we're going to explore that today. It's a film that I think a lot of people feel. It's less about those like in your face scares and more about this kind of lingering sense of dread that stays with you long after the credits roll. And I think what's going to make this deep dive really interesting is that we're going to be using this film critique that you provided to kind of look at it through that lens. So that should give us some unique perspectives.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about the others. It really subverts those typical horror tropes,
Mm.
right? Instead of just like hitting you over the head with jump scares, it slowly draws you into this world of psychological tension, almost like a classic Gothic novel.
Oh, that's so true. And that's something the critique really emphasizes is the sound, or I guess the lack of sound that Amenábar uses to really just make you lean in. And you're just holding your breath and wondering, like, what is lurking just out of sight?
Exactly. It's the anticipation,
Right.
like that prickling unease that comes from not knowing what's coming next. That's what really gets under your skin. And the setting itself, the fog-shrouded mansion, it's almost like a character itself.
Right.
It's trapping the characters and the audience in this oppressive atmosphere.
Absolutely. And speaking of trapped characters, let's talk about Grace, right?
Yeah.
Played brilliantly by Nicole Kidman. And just the way she portrays this woman who's teetering on the edge, she's trying so desperately to maintain control. I mean, it's a remarkable performance.
It really is. It's a captivating performance.
Yeah.
And you think about Grace's situation. She's this devoutly religious woman, isolated in this massive house, raising two children who have this very unusual photosensitivity,
Hmm.
right? So they're forced to live almost entirely in darkness. And the war has just ended. Her husband's missing. I mean, it's just this breeding ground for psychological turmoil.
Oh, for sure. The critique suggests that her strict religious beliefs and the rigid rules she imposes are her way of coping with that overwhelming sense of loss and uncertainty.
Yeah, and that's such an insightful point. It's like she's trying to create order and control in this world that feels increasingly chaotic and frightening. And by clinging to those rules and those rituals, she can, in a way, deny the possibility of anything else, anything supernatural disrupting this carefully constructed reality that she's built for herself.
Right. It makes you wonder if her denial of the supernatural events that are happening around her is her way of also denying her own grief and the unsettling truths that she's desperately trying to suppress. It's like she's closing herself off to the world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Good observation. And, it's interesting how the children's photosensitivity plays into this theme of denial. The critique kind of frames it as this metaphor. Their allergy to light is mirroring Grace's own aversion to facing the truth.
I never thought about it that way.
Wow.
Just like the children can't tolerate the sunlight, Grace can't bear to see what might be hidden in the shadows, both literally and figuratively.
It's true. That tension between the seen and the unseen, it really permeates the entire film. And the director masterfully uses those contrasting elements.
Right.
The light and shadow, the silence and sound. It creates a sense of unease and suspense. And it just slowly builds with each passing scene.
Yeah, and the way those elements are used visually is just stunning. I mean, the way the director uses shadows to kind of obscure faces, you're left wondering what emotions they're concealing. And then you have that flickering candlelight creating this sense of fragility and vulnerability, and that fog. Oh my gosh. It's like the house itself is exhaling a breath of mystery.
It's true. The visual storytelling is so powerful. Think about the recurring motif of closed doors and windows. It's like every room holds a secret. A truth that Grace is desperately trying to keep contained.
It's a visual representation of her compartmentalized psyche, right?
Right.
Each room is a separate compartment, each secret carefully tucked away, but we all know secrets have a way of finding their way out. And speaking of secrets, we have to talk about that ending. The critique calls it a haunting twist that reframes the entire story.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's one of those twists that makes you gasp, and then you immediately want to rewind the entire film to see how you missed the clues. Because it's not just shock for shock value. It fundamentally shifts your understanding of the characters and their reality.
So without giving anything away, I'm really curious to hear your take on the implications of that twist. What does it say about the film's larger themes?
Well, I think it really challenges us to question our perceptions of life and death. It blurs the lines between the two. The ending suggests that these realms might be more intertwined than we care to believe. And it raises profound questions about what truly lies beyond our perception.
It's almost as if the film is saying that the truth, however unsettling, has a way of catching up with us, no matter how hard we try to ignore it.
For sure. And it raises those age-old questions
So right.
that have haunted humanity for centuries. What happens after we die? Do we linger? Do we seek connection? And perhaps most unsettling of all, can we ever truly escape the echoes of our past?
Wow, it suddenly feels like we've gone way beyond just a simple ghost story. We're talking about denial, grief, the human condition. It's a lot to process.
It is, but that's what makes the others so compelling. It doesn't shy away from those big, uncomfortable questions. It invites us to confront our own fears, our own uncertainties about what lies beyond. And it does so with an elegance and a subtlety that's just truly remarkable.
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate how the film blends those classic horror elements, the eerie atmosphere, the unsettling visuals, with such profound emotional depth.
Exactly. The others isn't just trying to scare us. It's trying to make us feel, to
Yeah.
make us think. And that's what makes it a true masterpiece of psychological horror.
The critique also drew comparisons to other films like The Innocents and The Sixth Sense. And it's true, they all share those supernatural themes and twist endings. But I think The Other stands out because it grounds its horror in such a deeply personal and psychological space. It's not just about ghosts. It's about the ghosts we carry within ourselves. Our fears, our secrets, the truths that we try to bury deep down inside.
I couldn't agree more. The supernatural elements were almost secondary to the internal struggles of the characters. We're drawn into Grace's world, her anxieties, her desperate attempts to maintain control. And that's what makes the film so terrifying, because we recognize those same fears and vulnerabilities within ourselves.
Wow, this deep dive is already making me see the film in a whole new light. I can't wait to hear what other insights the critique has to offer. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a moment to really absorb what we've just discussed.
Yeah, let those initial observations sink in. Let yourself feel that lingering sense of unease, because trust me, it only gets more unsettling from here.
I am both excited and a little terrified to see where we go next.
Welcome back. I hope you've all had a moment to kind of let those unsettling thoughts settle in, because we're about to delve even deeper into the world of the others and explore the characters who inhabit this shadowy psychological landscape.
Yeah, I'm still reeling from that conversation about the ending, but I am ready to unpack more. And one character I haven't been able to shake is Mrs. Mills, the housekeeper. She's like this walking enigma, shrouded in this eerie calmness that seems almost at odds with the mounting tension in the house.
That's a great point. Fionnuala Flanagan's portrayal of Mrs. Mills
Yeah.
is absolutely mesmerizing. And the critique highlights how her serene demeanor stands in such stark contrast to Grace's increasing desperation. It creates this unsettling sense that perhaps Mrs. Mills knows more than she's letting on.
Oh, absolutely. There are these subtle hints, these knowing glances that make you wonder if she understands the true nature of the house and its secrets. It's like she's privy to some deeper truth that Grace is desperately trying to shield herself from.
And that's how Amenábar so skillfully builds suspense, through characters like Mrs. Mills who operate in this liminal space between what's known and unknown. We're constantly questioning her motives, her knowledge. Her very presence adds another layer to the film's unsettling atmosphere.
It's like she's a gatekeeper of sorts,
Yeah.
guarding the secrets of the house and its inhabitants. And speaking of enigmatic characters, we can't forget about Charles Grace's husband. He appears so briefly, yet his absence casts such a long shadow over the entire story. It's like he's a ghost himself haunting the lives of those left behind.
That's such a powerful observation. The critique suggests that Charles represents more than just a missing husband. He embodies the psychological and emotional void left by the war. The war has just ended. And here's this man returning home, perhaps physically intact, but emotionally and psychologically scarred. He's lost in his own world of trauma and displacement.
So he's not just a symbol of personal loss for Grace, but also a representation of those broader societal anxieties and uncertainties of that post-war era. The world has been irrevocably changed, and those who fought in the war are struggling to find their place in this new reality.
Precisely. And Charles's absence just adds to this pervasive sense of unease and displacement that permeates the entire film.
Yeah.
It really underscores the themes of loss, isolation, and the difficulty of reintegrating into a world that no longer feels familiar.
Right. And what about the children, Anne and Nicholas? They are so central to the story, yet they often seem to exist on the periphery, caught between this world of adults and the world of something else. I was particularly drawn to Alekina Mann's performance as Anne. There's a wisdom and a sensitivity in her eyes that belies her young age.
They both deliver such remarkably mature and nuanced performances. The critique points out how Anne's curiosity and her willingness to actually question what's happening around her drives a lot of the film's key revelations. She's the one who senses that something isn't right, who dares to peel back the layers of deception and denial.
She's almost like a conduit between the world of the living and the world of the dead, isn't she? Perhaps because she's a child, she hasn't yet built up those same walls of denial and skepticism that adults so often construct. She's more open to the possibility of the unseen, the unexplained.
That's a fascinating interpretation. And her photosensitivity, along with her brothers, plays a crucial role in the film's symbolism. It's not just a physical ailment. It's a reflection of the environment they're living in, both literally and metaphorically. They exist in this world shrouded in darkness. It mirrors Grace's own inability to face the truth.
Yeah, it's like the children's sensitivity to light becomes this physical manifestation of Grace's psychological state. They are quite literally living in the shadows of her denial.
Exactly. And speaking of symbolism, the critique mentions how those heavy curtains, the perpetually closed doors, that omnipresent fog, all of it works together to represent Grace's desperate attempts to control her surroundings and shut out the world.
It's as if she's created this prison of her own making, a world where she can dictate the rules, keep the darkness at bay, maintain that illusion of safety. But as we've seen, that illusion is fragile, and the truth has a way of seeping through the cracks.
That's what makes Amenábar such a brilliant visual storyteller. Every detail, every frame is meticulously crafted to convey meaning. The house itself becomes a character, a reflection of Grace's internal state. It's dark, claustrophobic, shrouded in secrecy, mirroring the turmoil brewing within her.
Yeah, it's almost as if the house is slowly suffocating its inhabitants, mirroring that psychological suffocation that Grace inflicts upon herself and her children. And it's in this suffocating atmosphere, this world of shadows and whispers, that those terrifying consequences of her denials begin to manifest.
And this brings us back to that game-changing ending. It reframes everything we thought we knew about the film, forces us to question our own perceptions of reality. And it's not just a clever plot device. It's a revelation that flips the script and makes us reevaluate everything. The characters, their motivations, the very nature of their existence.
Yeah, it's one of those endings that stays with you long after you've left the theater. It prompts you to question everything you thought you understood about the film. It's unsettling, thought-provoking, and utterly brilliant.
And that's the mark of a truly great film. Its ability to linger in the mind, to spark conversations, to challenge our assumptions. The Others achieves all of that and more. It's a film that demands to be discussed, analyzed, revisited.
It's so much more than just a horror film. It's a work of art that explores these complex themes of grief, denial, the fragility of our perceptions. And, speaking of art, I'm curious to hear what the critique has to say about the film's influences and its place within that broader horror genre.
That's a great segue. The Others draws inspiration from various sources, from Gothic literature to classic horror cinema. It weaves together this tapestry of influences to create something truly unique. But before we dive into that, I think it's important to acknowledge the film's score. The critique describes it as haunting and minimalist, and it definitely adds another layer of creepiness to the overall atmosphere.
Oh, it's true. The music composed by Amenábar herself is so subtle and understated, yet incredibly effective. It's like a whisper in the background, a constant reminder that something isn't quite right. Those eerie melodies, the dissonant chords, they create this pervasive sense of unease that just burrows under your skin.
Exactly. The score never overwhelms the visuals, but it complements them, enhances the film's overall sense of dread and suspense. It's like another character lurking in the shadows, foreshadowing the horrors to come.
Yeah, it's like the music is giving voice to those unspoken fears and anxieties that permeate the film. It's a brilliant example of how sound can be used to create this truly unsettling atmosphere.
Absolutely. And it speaks to Amenábar's mastery of his craft, his ability to create a cohesive and immersive experience that draws the audience into this world of psychological unease and creeping dread.
So as we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, I think it's important to just pause and appreciate how masterfully The Others blends those classic horror elements with such profound emotional depth. We got those chilling visuals, that haunting score. But at its core, it's a story about human frailty, our desperate attempts to cope with loss and maintain a semblance of control in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
And that's what makes it so resonant, so enduring. It's a film that speaks to something deep within us, to those primal fears and vulnerabilities that we all share. And as we move into part 3, we'll explore how The Others fits into the larger horror landscape, examining its influences and its lasting impact on the genre.
I can't wait to unravel those threads and see what other insights the critique has to offer. But for now, let's savor the unsettling beauty of The Others and let those lingering questions simmer in our minds. All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into The Others. We've covered so much ground, the unsettling atmosphere, the symbolic weight of every little detail, and of course that jaw-dropping twist. And I really want to kind of dig into the film's influences and how it fits into this larger world of horror.
Yeah, it's time to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
Right. And the critique draws some really interesting comparisons to films like The Innocents and The Sixth Sense. And, on the surface, they all do with the supernatural. But The Others feels distinctly different, doesn't it? It transcends just being a ghost story, and it becomes something more Profound. Yeah, absolutely. Like The Innocents, for instance, it plays with ambiguity, right? You're
Correct.
constantly questioning whether those ghosts are even real or are they just figments of the governess's imagination. And then you have The Sixth Sense, which delivers that emotional gut punch with its twist. You suddenly realize the protagonist's true state, and it's heartbreaking and terrifying all at the same time.
Right, and I think The Others strikes this really fascinating balance between those two approaches. It maintains that suspense of ambiguity. We're never quite sure what's real and what's not, but simultaneously delivers this twist that not only shocks but also forces us to re-examine the entire story through this brand new lens. It makes us question our own perceptions of reality and the nature of truth itself.
Yeah, and for me, what sets the others apart is that deeply personal and psychological framework. We're not just watching these ghosts flitting about, we're experiencing Grace's internal world. Her descent into fear and denial, her desperate attempts to cling to this reality that is slowly unraveling.
Right? It's as if those supernatural elements are a manifestation of her psychological state, like her repressed grief and trauma taking on this tangible form. The film becomes a study of the human psyche under duress, exploring how we cope with loss and the terrifying power of self-deception.
And then there are those undeniable Gothic influences that just permeate the film. That fog-drenched mansion, the heavy velvet curtains, that constant sense of foreboding. I mean, it feels like it's ripped straight from the pages of a classic Gothic novel.
Oh, it's true. The Others is a masterclass in Gothic atmosphere. It expertly utilizes those classic tropes, the isolated setting, the crumbling estate, the enigmatic characters. It creates this world that is both beautiful and terrifying. And it's not just about aesthetics either. Those Gothic elements tap into our primal fears. Fear of the unknown, fear of the dark, fear of the things that lurk just beyond our perception.
And the critique also highlights the importance of the historical context, too. The fact that the film is set in 1945, just after World War II. And I think that backdrop of loss and trauma and uncertainty just adds a whole other layer of depth to the story.
Absolutely. The war has left its mark on every single character in the film. Grace is struggling to come to terms with the disappearance of her husband. The children are growing up in a world shrouded in darkness. And even the servants carry the weight of this world that has been irrevocably shattered.
It's as if the ghosts in the film are just literal spirits, but also metaphors for the ghosts of the past, the lingering trauma and grief that haunt the characters and prevent them from moving forward.
That's such a profound insight.
Yeah.
The film becomes this meditation on how we process loss, how we grapple with these unseen forces, both internal and external, that shape our lives. And in that sense, The Others transcends genre conventions and becomes something much more universal and timeless.
And let's not forget about that score either. As we mentioned earlier, it adds so much to that unsettling atmosphere. The critique called it haunting and minimalist, and I couldn't agree more.
Right, the music is a character in itself. Those understated melodies, the dissonant chords, the strategic use of silence. It all works together to create this sense of creeping dread that builds throughout the film. It's a masterclass in how sound can be used to evoke emotion and amplify suspense.
It's like the music is whispering secrets to the audience, foreshadowing the horrors to come. It's both beautiful and unsettling, mirroring that duality of the film itself.
Precisely. The score is another example of how Amenábar masterfully blends all these artistic elements to create this cohesive and immersive experience. He's not just trying to scare us. He's crafting a world and atmosphere that draws us in and makes us complicit in the character's descent into darkness.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive, I think the big question is, what are the key takeaways we want our listener to walk away with? What makes The Others a film worth revisiting, worth pondering long after those credits roll?
I think The Others reminds us that the most terrifying monsters often reside within ourselves. It's a film that explores those dark corners of the human psyche, the power of denial, and the ways in which we construct our own realities to shield ourselves from the truth.
It's a film that challenges our perceptions. It forces us to question what we believe, and ultimately leaves us with more questions than answers. And sometimes those most unsettling questions are the ones that linger long after the lights come up.
Exactly. And perhaps that's the true brilliance of The Others. Its ability to stay with us, to haunt our thoughts, and to make us reconsider the world around us. The shadows that lurk within and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of it all.
So to our listeners, if you haven't experienced The Others, we urge you to seek it out. Turn off the lights, immerse yourself in its haunting beauty, and prepare to be both chilled and profoundly moved.
And as you watch, remember all the themes we've discussed, the layers of meaning woven into every frame. You might be surprised at what you discover lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed.
Until next time, keep exploring. Keep questioning and keep diving deep into the world of film and the mysteries of the human heart.